If you had the ability to go back in time and tell your younger self anything, what would you tell him? And obviously, like, the financial profit thing comes up, right? The whole Bitcoin idea. But I actually wanted to elaborate on this because I think it could be extremely beneficial for younger kids or baseball players or whatever listening to this. So if I could go back in time, and I'm going to provide a lot of context throughout my journey, and I've been very vocal about my professional journey coming out of high school, being a top pick and so on and so forth. So if I could go back in time, and I could tell my my younger self, say like 18-year-old, all right, say 18, like right before like getting drafted or whatever, what would I tell him? I would tell my younger self that you are good enough. You are good enough. So I would obviously hope to have a longer conversation with my younger self, because at that point in time, my 18-year-old self with long curly hair would just be like, yeah, I know I am. What does that mean? And here's why, because my 18-year-old self, and even myself like today, and this is just the way that I am, the way that I'm wired, the way that I was raised. Okay. Like, be a sponge, absorb as much information as you can, right? Always be willing to learn. Like, learning is a super valuable tool. And I love learning. So I would hope to have a longer conversation with my 18-year-old self, because I would go into depth, go into detail about what that actually means in terms of you are good as it is. You don't need to be anybody else to prove that you're good. And that was the thing that I talk a lot about back then, was there wasn't really a foundational aspect to me back then. I guess if you were looking at it like, you know, from just the baseball things, like, yeah, there was a foundation, like he was a good baseball player, got it, whatever. But the foundational piece that made me who I wasn't quite established in terms of like my, you know, pitching wise. All right, we're talking pitching to like strengths, like having a attack plan, things that I did really well, and I stuck to it every single game. So my thing has been historically throughout my entire life has been like, okay, I know what I'm kind of good at, but I don't want to utilize what I'm good at. I want to continue to work at what I'm not good at. So then hopefully, you know, those things that I'm not good at could be things that I am good at in the future. Well, that's a great tactic. But for me, what happened is like, I never established foundational pieces to my pitching game that I could always have. And I could always go to. My thing with my 18-year-old self, and the reason why I would, you know, if I'm sitting here 30 years old, so 12 years ago, that math is right? You are good enough, because even though it wasn't like a confidence thing, like I knew confidently I was good at 18, but I constantly like kind of wanted to be somebody else. Not necessarily it's hard to put into words, I guess, but it wasn't that I was wanting to be somebody else. I just thought that like in order for me to be, you know, a big leaguer, then I had to pick out a certain big leaguer that kind of resembled me, or I resembled him, and then like do exactly what he did, and like have that ability to do like breaking balls this way or breaking balls that way, like, you know, all this. And it got me away from the little foundation that I did have at 18, especially like 18 was an interesting age. So obviously the age that I got drafted and played my first pro season. And the reason why I wanted to include some clips from that first pro season, as you'll see, because like, whoa, he was good enough. Like the kid was good. Right. I remember feeling like, it's so funny because I remember being in the moment of my first season and feeling like, man, I'm overmatched. Like these guys I just watched on College World Series TV, like all this stuff. And I was like, I'm just an 18-year-old kid from a small town with one stoplight, you know? And then that's kind of, even though, you know, I felt that at times it was still, there was an instinctual like thing in my mind that was like, well, like, let's go. You're better. Prove it. So the cool thing about that first season when I was 18 was that they had an organizational policy that you don't mess with guys, coming out of the draft, you're super hands off and you just watch them go about their business. And that was the best thing for me at 18, because although I was like super, like I was a sponge, right? I wanted to absorb so much knowledge from everyone. I thought everyone had like so much good stuff, but they were bound to these organizational, commitments that we're not going to touch any new draft guys. We're just going to let them go about their thing. Which again, like I said, it was like extremely great for me, because that first pro season, I would say, is one of my better seasons, to be honest. Like statistically speaking, it's not going to look like that. I think I was like in a 5 ERA in a hitter's league, but being 18 and if you take away like, I think maybe 2 or 3 starts that year, like I had like a sub 3.5 or whatever. So, I threw really well. And then what happened was that next year, coming back when I was 19, that's when the whole idea of like, okay, well, I didn't have success at that league, so I got to change and I got to adapt and I got to do more things, and I got to be somebody else. And that's when I had completely like lost that identity / foundation. When I was 18, I thought I had to change it and I had to adapt. And I constantly, the worst thing for me, to be honest, and this is no disrespect to any organization or coaches or whatever, but the worst thing for me was getting put into extended spring training that following year, because extended spring training is basically just trial and error or us. Because if you're in a full season, if you break in a full season team, I guess they don't even have extended anymore, right? But if you break into a full season team, you're in the season, and there's really not a whole lot of time, right? If you're a starter, you're pitching every 5 days. There's really not a whole lot of time to tinker with things. But in extended spring training, dude, that is the mission. Like, you're there for a reason. You're not good enough. You better freaking change something. So it was just every week I was changing things and I was trying new things. And Harms and I talked about this the other day, like trial and error, like exploration is fantastic, but if you don't have a foundation of who you are, like an identity of who you are on the mound and things that you do really well, then you're going to lose that. And that was something that definitely happened to me. So if I could go back in time and I could talk to my 18-year-old self, right, going into my first year of pro ball, I'd say, dude, you're good enough. Like, you don't need anyone else's ideas or, whatever. I would be really interested to see like what would happen to that 18-year-old Rob if someone were to tell him like, dude, what you do now is good enough to be a 20-win big league pitcher. And I just would love to see like, okay, if that idea is in his mind, what's he capable of? Because I always felt that, okay, if I didn't do well, if I wasn't in the place that I wanted to be at, then I needed to change something. And I kind of still have that idea, right? I think as humans, like that's how we're wired anyways, constantly looking to evolve. But my desperate seek of evolving and getting better also like limited my ability to establish foundational pieces to what made me good. In the first place, I was 88th overall in the draft, 18 years old. I would have went way higher if I didn't have a terrible last start in my high school year. Looking first round, like I could, like very, very, and I hate to sit here and say like, could have this, could have that. Like obviously everyone can say that, but that was something that at the time I'm not sitting there thinking of. I'm sitting there, okay, what do I got to do today? Who do I got to learn from to be better, right? And learn and work hard and hoorah, all this stuff. And looking back now, I never really, we talk about confidence and conviction and what establishes that or what instills that in people. And yeah, I was confident and I was convicted, but there was the idea in the back of my mind, and a lot of times, honestly, in the front of my mind, that was like, yeah, but you're not that good, obviously, right? Like you're not breaking records in this league that you're in, or like you didn't advance your first year, like you're not that good. So if I could go back in time, so me now, 30 years old, go back in time, talk to 18-year-old Rob, full set of hair, I'd be like, dude, like you're freaking good, bro. Like what you do now is good enough to be a big leaguer. Like what you do now is good enough to be a bigger leaguer. And I think what would happen would be that 18-year-old kid would be like always in remembrance of that idea of, oh, I am good. Now I just need to kind of like just piece together and get better at some of the things that I already do and not like totally change, you know, my process in effort to, you know, be somebody else that was potentially better. Because every time I changed, maybe sometimes in the short game, or, you know, in the small picture, it benefited me, you know, a little bit of instant success or whatever. But in the long game, it didn't. All right. Hopefully you can take something from that. I'm going to include some clips now of 18-year-old Rob pitching in my first year of pro ball, just not knowing what he is doing up there on the mound, just lifting his leg and throwing pitches that he says he has and having fun doing it. All right, guys. Much love. Till next time.